You're listening to Atlanta Baseball Talk, your weekly podcast for all things Atlanta Braves.
Welcome to show number 281. Today is Monday, September 29th, 2014, and my name is Steve. I am joined by both Hammy and Kurt, so guys, let's do it.
Woo!
So in tonight's show, we'll wrap up the Braves' regular season, check in on our last shots in the dark for the year, and give our postseason predictions. But guys, first, a week ago today, the Braves got the old band back together, threw a little party in front of some reporters, and also fired Frank Wren. So, guys, there's been a lot of twists and turns, really, since that press conference. So, Hammy, let's start with you. What's your take on why Frank was fired?
There's a lot of reasons. I think first and foremost, someone had to go. After this season, someone had to go. And I think Frank was the obvious choice. Certainly there was a lot of fuel for this. There was the BJ signing and the Ugla signing and the Kenshin Kawakami signing and just all of them adding up that Frank had put together. And while he had done some good stuff and had found some value, that we were where we were in a bad way because of the moves that he had made. And there was really no evidence that he was going to GM his way out of where we were now. So I think that he had made a lot of bad moves. I think that there were some good moves, but ultimately someone's head had to go, and he was the obvious choice. I'll start there. I think there are other reasons, but if no one had gone, there would have been a revolt. And I think that people would have just stopped coming to games and there would have been a big impact. So they had to do something. And I think that firing Frank was the most obvious move.
You know, so leading up to this, as it was, especially as reports started coming out that it was more likely Frank was going to go than Freddie and all that, I could absolutely argue Frank should go. The signings you mentioned, the construction of this team, while it worked last year, really didn't work this year, all of that stuff. But one of the things that struck me the most about that press conference was, like, none of that stuff was mentioned. There was nothing about, you know, the wrong pieces or even alluding to, you know, we can't make these kind of free agent signing mistakes given our payroll. Like, there was all the things that were actually true about the Frank era. Nothing was mentioned. Did that strike you guys?
Curtis?
Yeah, I think so. But I think that that's more telling that to me, and wow, obviously the moves, specifically the BJ move, loom large over his legacy. I think it's more telling that stuff wasn't mentioned, and I think it was more behind the scenes stuff. You read about these well-respected members of the organization leaving. He obviously, from what we've read, had a poor relationship with Bobby Cox. And
you know, lots of implications in interviews this week that's why Bobby left when he did.
Right, that he was almost forced out of the dugout by Frank Wren. And clearly Bobby Cox has a very close relationship with John Schuerholz, as he and Schuerholz and John Hart sat there and talked about this situation. He lost a battle in that he lost a battle with Bobby Cox. That they were willing, or they wanted to go back to that time when Bobby and John Schuerholz ruled the world. And so Frank Wren was an outsider in that scenario, and I think that his managerial style rubbed a bunch of people the wrong way. And I think that played a huge role in him not being around anymore. You wonder if they would win 96 games this year. You know, I mean, they talked about that this was 3 years in the making. There was an article about how they talked about potentially firing Frank Wren 3 years ago.
Yeah, which Kurt is so weird, right? Here's a quote from Schuerholz. Someone had asked, like, when they started thinking about it, and Schuerholz said, quote, "I can't tell you exactly what period of time, but as we began to examine things in our farm department and our scouting department, our major league club, it was a cumulative thing." Which, okay, I'll take that at face value. But then how do you explain the contract extension in February of this year? if
Right.
they were thinking about it 3 years ago, and it's been a cumulative thing and all of that. There's a lot of talking out of both sides of mouths on this thing.
Well, and you know the Braves, their whole situation. It's one of these things, and you know we kind of equate them to some other local teams here, but they kind of remind me of the Falcons. You know, that you had the Falcons go and play in the NFC Championship game and look like they're on the precipice of being a world champion, and then the next year they go 4-12, and you're like, wow. So the little things that were wrong were actually huge things, and the things that we thought maybe we could get by, really we can't. And that seems to like what happened with the Braves this year. Is like all the things that went their way last year didn't go their way this year. And they, all of a sudden, there's just these glaring holes up and down their lineup and in their, you know, their whole organization. Their farm system is obviously in bad shape. So, yeah, I mean, it's certainly he's the fall guy, but maybe with due cause.
But I think, Stevie, your point about if they'd won 96 games this year, I think it would be a different story, obviously. I think
was
that
my point.
Yeah, you guys sound the same to me. So I think that but I think that you know, and it was sort of surprising to me, I guess, when you sort of stack them all up, how much he was disliked by everybody. He really had no one in his corner, and I think actually his success, and you have to admit that he took an old team, he turned it around, he did have some success, and I know that these stats annoy Kurt, but we have had a high winning percentage over these past couple of years.
Does high winning percentage bother you, Kurt?
No, but he does though. It does. He's like, well, don't tell me that, you know, he's the best manager, or, you know, he's won the most games, which you know, can be annoying and a misleading stat. But we have been a team certainly in the top half of the 32 teams in the major leagues, or the 30 teams. But I think this year, when everything fell off, it was much easier to remember how you know, prickly he was. That's not even a word. Prickly he was to work with, and how much you didn't like him. And I think finally folks would say, okay, let's do this, right? I think his success in past years sort of, you know, overcame some of his not easy to work with. But this year he had nobody in his corner. All the wheels fell off, and it was a very easy decision for these guys to finally let him go.
Yeah, D.O.B. was on Buster Olney's podcast the day or two after the firing, and he intimated essentially that they were relieved. The you know, Sherholtz was relieved about the team's performance this year because it gave them the opportunity to fire Frank.
Right.
I mean, the answer is clearly his style and his personality and the way he did or didn't, in this case, get along with everybody. It's just so weird. You know, Frank, I think, did a lot more right than he did wrong. I mean, I really do. Hammy, you're right. He came into a terrible situation and turned the team around with a middle of the pack payroll.
Right.
He clearly couldn't sign free agents. I mean, that just was not his forte. But he did the smaller things right.
Well, but you talk about winning percentage, which you know, I respect winning percentage, but when it all comes down to it, they won 2 postseason games while Frank Wren was general manager of the team. So, winning percentage, regular season aside, they're, regardless of what, you know, your constraints are, everything like that. To me, the ultimate goal is to advance in the postseason, if not win the whole thing. And you know, it's kind of the same old with the Braves, is that even with high wins in the regular season, that once they got to the postseason, you know, luck or not, whatever we want to call it, they were not able to perform up to our expectations, and I'm sure that played a part in it too.
Yeah, and look, I think it's very important in the workplace that, you know, the guys in upper management are not total jerks, and you can work with them and they have good working relationships. Like, you know, I can't really question that with the results this year and all that other stuff, getting rid of Frank wasn't the right thing to do. It's just a little harder to take in the context of the 2 Johns and Bobby sitting up there and talking about the Braves way, and let's get to the Braves way in a second. You know, as if they had nothing to do with it, they were around for all these decisions and were, in theory, they were consulting him and giving the nod to these moves that he made. It's just a little hard to take the, hey, let's just go back to the 90s when Frank had, done some good things.
Well, and I think it's a little short-sighted. Sorry, Ham, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, and we'll get to it in a second, but I don't really like anything coming out of Schuerholz's mouth these days. I don't trust management. I don't feel a warm, fuzzy feeling about him. Like, oh, thank God John Schuerholz is here. We're in a steady hand. Everything feels duplicitous, with the move to Cobb, and just everything just feels weird. And so this is shrouded in that, right? And while I agree with the decision, Stevie, like you said, and I think it was Jeff Schultz or one of the guys, again, they all sound the same to me as well, that it was a very weird thing that it was this like good old boys club getting up there where they just fired Frank Wren and they're all laughing and hucking it up and all this stuff. And it left a horrible taste in my mouth. And I lost respect for those guys just as much.
Yeah, so let's talk about that press conference a little more. The common refrain there was the Braves way, and it was really used as the explanation for Wren's firing, right? They didn't talk about the free agent moves or any of that stuff. And the point being that the organization had strayed from the Braves way under Frank's leadership. So I think it was Jeff Schultz actually asked Schuerholz to define the Braves way. And Schuerholz said, quote, "It's a special way of identifying young players who you want to become part of your organization with great comfort and expectation that when they put on a Braves uniform, they'll be taught well, instructed well. Their makeup and their character will allow them to turn into winning championship caliber players. They'll fill the pipeline of this organization with highly capable, high character, young, winning men who help you win many, many championships on a major league level year after year after year."
Unlike we ever did before.
So Kurt, what do you think about this whole Braves way angle?
I think it's.
Am I leading the witness?
Yeah, I think it. I mean, I've never seen such negative feedback to John Schuerholz since I can remember. I mean, I think it's almost like he thinks we're all rubes and that we haven't been paying attention to this team for the past 10, 12 years. I can't imagine an organization that doesn't want to bring in men of high character that want to be coached and want to achieve success and play to their highest abilities and win lots of world championships. I mean, does that really single you out as a franchise? And if we are picking ways, I choose the St. Louis Cardinals way, or the San Francisco Giants way, or perhaps the Boston Red Sox way, that they are actually winning championships. Under your tutelage, Mr. Schuerholz, we've won one championship, and the man that you beat is the man that you've now hired to be your GM. He is the John Schuerholz of the American League. He won a bunch of regular season games and could never do anything in the postseason. So, I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. It's absurd. As if, and maybe this is more of an indictment on Frank Wren. You said he didn't talk about players. Maybe this is a shot that some of these guys that Frank Wren brought in, like Chris Johnson, like B.J. Upton, maybe these are people that they don't think are character players. We all know that they have gotten rid of guys like Dion, like David Justice, anybody that had any sort of character that rubbed them the wrong way. They were ushered out the door as quickly as possible. So maybe that's a shot at Frank Wren and the players that he's brought in. But I mean, it's comical. It's comical.
It's hogwash.
It's spin. I mean, and it's silly, arrogant spin. And you're right, Kurt. It's kind of insulting because it doesn't say anything. It's such mom and apple pie stuff, like you said. As a mission statement or something for a baseball team, we want to bring in character guys who win baseball games. Of course,
we want to score more runs than the other team. It's nonsense. And sorry, Stevie, and then the other thing of the Braves way is we also want to play in an era of an expansion where we get to play the Rockies in the postseason every year, and we're in a weak division, and we want to get really lucky with injuries, and we want to hopefully sign a couple of Hall of Famers. It's nonsense. And that we stopped wanting to win and stopped trying to build a farm system and stopped trying to get good free agents is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It's like it's the Major League Baseball way, right? Which team is not like that? Like you guys keep saying, and that it was just so. It felt like such corporate speak, right? It felt like Roger Goodell trying to defend the Ray Rice thing. And it felt like nonsense. It was just so nonsense.
It's just such empty words. So, Ham, during the press conference, one of the reporters brought up Freddie and asked Bobby his opinion of the job that he's done in the years that he's been here. And Bobby said, quote, "Freddie's done a remarkable job. Just outstanding."
Ugh.
So between
was that emphasis added, or was that
yeah?
I may have editorialized that a little. So Ham, on a scale of 1 to 100%, what percent chance do you put it at that Freddie is the manager on opening day next season?
95%. I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. All right, Curtis.
Much higher than that. The old 110% try. I just don't see how it's ever happening. And I mean, honestly, if you were to come up with 2 words about Freddie Gonzalez's tenure as manager of this team, would remarkable and outstanding, where would they fall in the list of things that you could come up with?
Maybe I would have picked just and done for the 2 words.
You could say remarkable and not mean remarkably good. It's just worthy of remark.
Yes.
You know, if they go with someone other than Dayton Moore or John Capalella, that's the only sliver of a possibility, right? Like if they really end up with some, accomplished guy who's like, look, I'll come in, but, I'm picking my own staff. That's the only chance. Now, I don't think there's much of a chance that that's going to happen.
Yes, I think the chances of that happening,
right,
0%.
Yeah, it's true.
And the thing that's going to drive me crazy is if they hire Dayton Moore.
Oh, I know.
And don't hire Capalella. To finally kind of change the face of this whole organization, figuratively and literally, to go young, to go in a different direction and not kind of the old staid ways of these guys that are in charge. At some point, this dude's going to walk. He's everywhere you see. He's the GM that's mostly, or the next guy that everybody wants as their next GM. So, it's like, why does he have to spend 2 years under John Hart learning how to put together a team that can't win in the postseason? Can't he just take on the reins of that now?
Seriously.
Well, it seems like he's the perfect guy in that Sherholtz gets to keep someone in the family. Whereas and not have to bring in Dayton Moore. I mean, I assume he would want to bring in Dayton Moore, but Capalella's right there, and I think it would get him. It would allow Sherholtz to do the Hart is the mentor for the first year, so he gets to keep Hart around. Which reports came out that he offered Hart the GM job. So if Sherholtz had his druthers, it would be Hart, but so he gets sort of the best of both worlds. Because you don't need to keep Hart around as acting GM, quote unquote, if you bring in Dayton Moore.
I don't want them to bring in Dayton Moore.
I don't want them to bring in Dayton Moore either.
At all. I don't care where he's managing, GMing now, whatever. No date. It's the Braves way. It's just like, let's continue this thing and just hope nobody notices.
Right, exactly.
And it's got to be Capalella. It's perfect for the Braves. I mean, Curtis, you said it. He's young. Just give him the reins now. What's the worst thing that could happen? I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? They're just as bad as they were this year and just as frustrating. He's got the perfect blend, and lots of folks have talked about this, perfect blend of sort of that scouting guy, but also the saber guy. He knows how to evaluate both with his eyes as well as with sort of the spreadsheet, and it seems perfect. It's just what the Braves need. It's youth. He's been, he was in the Yankees organization before he came here, so he's seen what it's like. Not the Royals organization. It's almost too good to be true. We almost don't deserve it, but he's here, and if we blow it, it will be just criminal, and we should give it to him now. What is mentoring under? I mean, he's been mentoring. I guess, okay, I answered my own question. He's been mentoring under Frank Wren, so make your own joke there. But what is mentoring under John Hart going to do? Can't John Hart just sort of consult him? I mean, Sherholtz is the president. Why not now?
Right, that brain trust can totally be in place. Bobby Cox, John Sherholtz, John Hart, those guys can all keep the same exact jobs they have now and bring this guy in. I just don't see why you don't go ahead and make that move. Now, especially a team that is a young team and needs a lot of makeover, on a budget. I mean, you got to bring a lot of pieces in, and you need to revamp your farm system. So I just don't see why, if this guy's so clever and really on top of things. And like you said, Ham, there was an article today even about how all these teams, nobody is just going Sabre these days, because you can't. I mean, you have to go with the scouts too, and that's where the approach is, and that's exactly where this guy's areas of expertise are. So why not just give him the opportunity?
So if you guys had to take John Capalella or the field on who's going to be the next GM, who do you take?
Copy.
Kurt?
And we're not including John Hart in that
We're not
conversation?
including John Hart. John Hart's not taking the job.
Well, but I mean, the thing that I keep saying this, the thing that I've read is that they're going to, I mean, the interim tag, he could potentially oversee this for 2 years while this guy, after being under Frank Wren for 7 years, this guy's going to spend 2 more years under Hart. But I think he will be the guy unless he gets an offer by a bigger team to go somewhere else.
All right, I'll take the field. I think it's too good to be true, and I see those 3 guys sitting up there, and it just feels like they're not going to make that decision.
Not wanting to turn the reins over.
Right.
And maybe he doesn't take that job because of that, knowing that he's going to be so hamstrung by the Sunshine Boys or whatever they called themselves. It sounds like a bad Clint Eastwood astronaut movie or something like that. But
it sounds like a Tim Conway movie.
Yeah.
Tim Conway.
Hey, don't
Harvey Korman.
Yes.
Same age.
All right, so guys, let's stay on Freddie for a second. Chipper was on 680 The Fan this week, and they were asking him about, his sort of opinions about the team and the chemistry and all that. And he said, quote, "In my opinion, from time to time, Freddie was told who to play." He also implied that Frank did not consult with Freddie on personnel decisions at all. So, Kurt, hearing that, does that change your opinion any about Freddie and if he should return next year?
No. I understand part of that, and I understand as a manager that you would be frustrated if people told you had to play somebody. But Uggla hadn't played in a year and a half. BJ wasn't on the postseason roster last year, so right?
Yeah, that's true. No. BJ Uggla wasn't.
Right, but he never played, right? But you know what I mean. I just don't see how they had. And if that were the case, why didn't somebody else step in and say, "Look, Jay needs to be benched for the good of the team"?
Yeah, you'd think Sherholtz or Hart would have stepped in.
And assuming that's who they're talking about, because we've talked at length this year about the fact that there really were no replacements for most of these guys. The guys you had to replace him were worse than the guys you had on the field. Chris Johnson, somebody like that. There was nobody to replace him.
And I can believe that Wren was like, you got to play BJ, you got to play BJ. But I have trouble believing that Frank said, you got to play BJ and you need to put him in the one hole. Honestly, I'm not even trying to be funny. Like, I just can't believe that was the scenario. Because no smart baseball person is going to put your worst hitter in the National League and give him the most at-bats.
Unless you're the manager of the Braves.
Right. Hammy, what about you? Freddie should be back next year now with this information?
It softens it a little bit for me. Freddie his in-game decisions were horrible. We questioned his lineup a bunch. If someone else was sort of helping him to make the lineup, maybe it's not all on him. It doesn't make him a good manager. It speaks to a lack of confidence in him, which is troubling. And if that came from Frank and that goes away now with Frank being gone, maybe that's good for him. But it doesn't do it just troubles me more about the Braves that there's sort of these hidden backdoor machinations where Frank is trying to pull strings. Nobody is making good decisions on this team, whether Freddie's being told what to do or not to do. The fact that's even more troubling is that Freddie wasn't consulted on personnel decisions, more so than the lineup. I get that. Frank's like, come on, you got to play BJ, so maybe somebody will trade for him or something. But the fact that he wasn't consulted on personnel decisions just speaks to bad, collective leadership. And it doesn't instill a lot of faith in the club.
Yeah, I mean, it reflects poorly on Frank, there's no doubt, but it has no bearing on Freddie's deficiencies, his in-game management, his bullpen management, right? Bobby had those same deficiencies, and you lived with those because you had guys who were fiercely loyal to Bobby and played their butts off for Bobby every game, right? And I know that some of the broadcasters and certainly the coaching staff bristled at this notion of the team quit. But if you watched any of the last month and a half, you saw that some of those guys were not giving their all, right? There was a good article from DOB about Greg Walker in the AJC today, and Walker was talking about the offense. And here's a couple quotes from him. Walker said, "We gave away too many at-bats this season. I think the main reason was just frustration." Doesn't sound like a good leader at the top with Freddie there. Walker also said of the Nationals, "This year everybody saw that they were getting better as the year went on, so they kind of punched us in the face, and we didn't keep moving forward." Again, that's on Freddie, right? I mean, if you're not going to be a good X's and O's guy, you have to be a good leader. And we didn't see that from Freddie this year really at all. To me, this stuff,
we've never seen
doesn't
that
matter. It doesn't
We've
matter
never seen that from him.
that Frank was meddling. Freddie should not be back.
And yet,
there's a 112% chance that he will be. All right, guys, let's close out our shots in the dark for the year. So, Curtis, last week you predicted as a team the Braves would hit .218 with 2 homers. They hit .214, very nice, with 4 homers.
Pretty close.
They hit a homer in each of the Phillies games. I wouldn't know that because I really didn't watch the last week at all. Let's be honest. Hammy, you predicted the Braves would average 4 runs per game the final week. You're thinking that once they were out of the playoffs, they would blossom?
Something with that. Yeah, whatever.
So the Braves scored 19 runs in the final week for an average of 2.7 a game.
So close.
And I predicted that there would be a visible argument in the dugout. And again, not having watched the games, I can't say for a fact there wasn't. But I'm guessing I would have read about it if there had been a big fight in the dugout. So, Kurt, you're the winner. And you and I tie with 2 wins in September to Hammy's 0. And I don't know who won the most months, but probably you, Kurt.
I think
congratulations.
All my soft picks.
Exactly. Yeah. They paid off for you. All right. So our 2 shots in the dark from listeners. First was Brave Ray J on Twitter. He predicted, or she, that the Rays and Marlins would finish with better records than the Braves, and that was not to be. The Braves finished with 79 wins.
The Mets and Marlins.
I think they said the Rays.
Oh, the Rays. I thought you said the Braves and Marlins. I'm so sorry, Steve. Yeah.
And the Rays and the Marlins, Hammy finished with 77.
Okay.
And then Cardo was taken from Twitter, predicted the Braves would have between 60 and 70 strikeouts in their final 7 games. They ended up with 63.
Wow.
For that final week. So there you go. Nice job. All right, so guys, the 2014 Braves season is mercifully over. Let's hand out some awards and wrap this thing up as we look back on the year. So, Ham, your 2014 MVP.
Wow, this is hard.
It was the hardest one.
It was the hardest one. Well, actually, LVP, although it was a little bit easier, but there's certainly some other people in this runnings for that. A lot of folks, a lot of injuries, slumps. For me, it was Justin. He helped us win the most games when it was said and done. And even though he totally withered for most of September, he certainly was not alone there. And I think he was our best player this year.
Curtis?
Well, I would offer the most valuable player. I'm going with Aaron Harang, a total scrap heap that we expected nothing out of, that we paid really nothing for, $1 million. And he carried us. I mean, the starting pitching was great. You could give it to a couple of those guys, but I think we expected something out of Tehran. Once Wood got back in there, I think we expected stuff out of him. Mike Minor, we expected. Of course, he was up and down, but Harang really was amazing. I mean, 22 starts, he gave up 2 or fewer runs. And the Braves just did nothing to help him out. And his record could have been so much better, but they just didn't help him out at all. He set career highs in FIP and ERA, all sorts of numbers out of him that really were extraordinary. I don't expect that he'll be able to repeat these things, even though the Braves will probably make their best attempt to keep him around and keep their fingers crossed that he does. But I'm going with Aaron Harang.
Yeah, he was quoted a day or two ago that he wants to come back. And my God, you double his salary and bring him back. So Hayward and Tehran led the team in WAR from a position player and starting pitcher perspective. And I really want to go with no one because no one made a real difference on the team at 79 wins. But to me, it's Alex Wood or Aaron Harang, the starting pitchers, or Tehran. The starting pitchers were the most consistent performers, but it just didn't matter because no one really provided any value to this team because the other side of the equation, whether it would be the offense or when the offense was clicking, the middle relief or whatever would just tank the results. So, I'll go with Alex Wood. All right. Yeah, I know. Steve Hummer wrote a funny thing that the most valuable player this year was the guys that had to clean up the visiting dugout.
Steve Hammond or Tom Hammond?
The clubhouse.
Yeah, the
visiting clubhouse guy.
Yeah,
after the
welcoming.
The dual celebrations.
Exactly.
I know. It's too bad the Dodgers couldn't come to town right afterwards.
All right, Kurt, your 2014 LVP.
Well, not that this guy was the worst player on our team, but I would say that I was most disappointed by Freddie Freeman. Coming off of what we all thought was just a magical season last year, and so did the Braves, obviously, that they signed him to that massive extension. And he came out, and he wasn't certainly terrible, but he was not anywhere near the player he was last year and anywhere near the player the Braves needed him to be this year. And really struggled a lot with the strikeouts were up, and you look at his batting average across the board in really the clutch situations that he needed to be in, other than 2 outs with runners in scoring position, which he was great. But late close innings, he was only batted 248. When the Braves were behind, he only batted 239. So I'm reluctantly giving it to Freddie Freeman just because I had such huge expectations for him this year.
Kurt, I am not reluctantly going to disqualify you from the rest of this segment as you twist and bastardize the definitions of these things.
I know. but in a way that you said, since it is most valuable.
Yes.
As we don't know apparently you don't know the definition.
I do.
Okay.
All right, Hammy.
It's BJ, right? I don't know. And there were a lot of people in the running for me. And there was a lot of disappointment. So maybe the most disappointing player, Curtis. But BJ, I mean, he did the most damage to this team over the course of the season. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. I mean, and clearly BJ's the answer, but I want to nominate the second place winner goes to Avilan. Led the team in led the relievers in ERA, led them in WHIP, was just a train wreck. God, he was awful. All right, Ham, one thing for the team this year that went exactly as you thought it would.
Same answer as number 2.
BJ?
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of reason to expect that it would go any differently. I think I was maybe the most optimistic that trying him in the one hole might have worked, and it didn't, obviously. But it shouldn't have been surprising.
Do you remember, guys, that a third of the way through the season when they put BJ in the 1 and moved Hayward down, and for that first 2 weeks, BJ hit 250?
Yeah, he got a hit in every game.
He got a hit in every game. And I remember the show, we were like, so we're going to stop worrying about BJ and stop doing the BJ meter and all that. And we're like, yeah. No, BJ, we can live with the 250. And then an hour later, he hit .80.
Yeah.
All right, Curtis, the one thing that went, so this is exactly as you thought it would.
I'm gonna bloviate about something completely on the opposite side of this. The offense. I had a feeling it was going to be bad. Maybe I didn't expect it to be quite that bad, but I knew the offense was not going to be very good, and it was terrible.
Indeed. So mine was that Johnny Venters would not pitch an inning. all the hanging our hopes that in the middle of the summer he was going to come back from his second Tommy John and shore up the lefty need and all that. That unfortunately went exactly as I saw it.
Yeah.
All right, Kurt, the one thing that generally surprised you this year.
That means you didn't expect it to happen.
Right.
Wait, I'm writing these down as we're going through these.
Okay.
The starting pitching. You lose Medlin, you lose Beachy, then you lose Gavin Floyd in the season. And to be the linchpin that they were the entire season, and totally, we would imagine where we would have been if the starting pitching had been terrible this year. We would have won 50 games.
Could you imagine? Right? I mean, the 106 or something like that, quality starts, all that. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, so that it totally shocked me. All those guys played such a huge role, even small parts, but they all played a huge role, and that totally shocked me.
All right, Hammy.
I was surprised that Gaddis actually was a pretty good everyday catcher. I know we thought he was good. He was great last year in his spots. I was nervous that teams would figure him out, and and obviously he got sick here down the stretch with just some freak injuries. But I personally didn't think that he was going to hold up over the course of the season. 263, 22 homers. It's not a bad season for a catcher. I would take that from him. So that was a surprise to me.
Yeah, because he really went in the tank for pretty significant stretches last year. As good a season he had at the plate, he disappeared too. So yeah, I think that's good. So for me, I'm going to go with Freddie Freeman's inconsistency. I mean, do you remember the first month, guys, where he just didn't make any outs?
Yeah.
His slash line that first month was 320, 395, 570. He hit 6 home runs in April and then 12 the rest of the year. Just crazy. All right, Ham, last one. If you could have one do-over from the season, what would it be? Meaning like a managerial move, a front office move, something. What would your do-over be?
So it's a theme here, and I've already brought this up. I would go back in time and not put BJ in the leadoff spot. We gave away games, and down the stretch it wasn't as close as it looked, but we were right in it until last week, and I think that changed our season, right? I think we gave away too many games by having BJ, the experiment at the top of the lineup, go way too long. And if I could do that over again, it would have never happened.
Curtis?
Yeah, I guess that. I mean, I couldn't really come up. I couldn't think of something. I mean, unfortunately, the things that happened to the Braves this year, there weren't things that you could have changed. I mean, I wish maybe that they hadn't released Jordan Schaefer and given him more opportunities, because he's certainly flourished now that he's been with the Twins. But yeah, I mean, this season just seemed snake bit the whole way through, and they could just never get going. So I don't know that there's one thing I could pinpoint that would have really made that big of a difference.
Yeah, mine was, although it's kind of cheating, is that they had signed Hudson in the offseason. And I know that I'm not saying they should have, and the money he got from the Giants was crazy, despite the performance he put in this year. But it would have been interesting to see with a veteran guy, a truly veteran guy, on the pitching staff, in the clubhouse, if it had changed anything this year, and that leadership void.
Yeah, and you wonder if the insulting offer that was made by the Braves, if that instantly, he maybe was set to sign with the Braves and would have taken a decent offer from the Braves, but once that he got insulted, that his agent didn't immediately go out and start seeking out other places for his employment.
Yeah, well, probably. All right, guys, let's wrap it up with postseason predictions. So, Kurt, who do you got in both league championship series, and who wins it all?
I have Washington playing the Dodgers, and the Angels playing the Orioles. Angels over Dodgers in the World Series.
All right, Hammy?
I have the Dodgers beating the Nationals in the NLCS. I have the Pirates and the A's winning their play-in games. Not that you asked, but I wanted to get that out there. And then I have the Dodgers beating the Nationals, and I actually have the Orioles beating the Angels, and then the Dodgers over the Orioles in the World Series.
We all have Angels-Orioles in the ALCS. So I have Giants-Dodgers, Angels-Orioles, and the Dodgers beating the Angels in the World Series. I just can't see a team getting past 3 Kershaw starts I just think it's going to be too much. And I just don't believe... It's funny, we all just can't see the Tigers getting past the Orioles. There's just something about the Tigers, man. Can't...
Not their year. Not their year.
Exactly. All right, guys, that is the show. So, everyone, we will be back next week with a member of the media, still to be determined, to get his take on
hopefully the sports media.
Hopefully the sports media. Yes, that's true.
We're gonna get a mommy blogger next week. Get some brownie recipes.
All right, so everyone, please make sure you're subscribed to the show on our YouTube channel, as well as on iTunes or Stitcher, so that you don't miss any of our shows. And as always, check us out at AtlantaBaseballTalk.com for past shows, to check out our blogs, and to post in our comment section. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at ATL Baseball Talk, and to like us on Facebook. Thanks again for listening, everyone, and go Braves!
Thanks for listening to Atlanta Baseball Talk, your weekly podcast for all things Atlanta Braves. To find new shows, to post in our forum, or to send a comment, please visit us at AtlantaBaseballTalk.com.
Had to admit the problem.